Good evening. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Shavuos Daf Zayin, and we're starting just about halfway down, maybe a little bit more than halfway down on Tes Zayin Amud Beis. Mirz Hashem, today we'll be able to get toward the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Again, we're at the two dots right in the middle of the page of Tes Zayin Amud Beis. The Gemara says, "V'hishtachava o sheshaha kadei hishtachava." The Gemara says that if one were to be in the Heichal and they became Tameh, if a Kohen became Tameh in the Heichal, so if they were to do Hishtachava, if they were to bow, or if they would wait the amount of time that it would have taken for Hishtachava, then the halacha is that they would be held accountable. They would be Chayev, a Korban. So says the Gemara, and now we're going to see two versions of Rava. This requires paying attention to the differences. Neither sheet is hard. Neither version of Rava is hard, but there's just not a big difference between them. Amar Rava, lo shanu, when is this din true that you're chayiv? Ela sheishtacha beklape pnim. That's when the Kohen who became tameh in the Heichal, he bowed toward the pnim, toward the holiest parts. Aval hishtach beklape chutz. But if he were to have bowed outward with his back to the Heichal, facing the doorway that he was going to walk through, then we apply the rules of the waiting. Shaha in lo shahalo. If he waited long enough, then yes, then he'd be chayiv. And if he didn't wait long enough, then he wouldn't be chayiv. So again, facing inwards, it's just did you bow or did you not bow? Facing outwards, it depends how long you waited. This is version number one of Rava. And ika damasne lo asefa. Some say Rava's line was actually on a different part of the Mishnah. That different part of the Mishnah is this quote over here. Again, we're a little bit more than halfway down, 8 lines into the wide lines on Tes Zayin Amud Beis, Rosh Hashanah, Bichdei Hishtachava, that on that line, that if this Kohen who became Tameh in the Heichal were to wait the amount of time it takes to be Mishtachava, then he would be Chayiv. Michlal, what does this imply? Tishtachava Gufa Ba'ashihiyah, that any bowing, inwards or outwards, requires this. And here, Amar Rava, no, the diuk is not correct. Lo shanu ela sheishtachva klape chutz. And here, as you can see, he inverts. He says, what are we talking about? That's only ishtachva klape chutz. That's when we have the waiting game. Aval klape pneim afal gav de lo shah. That if the Kohen who became Tameh in the Heichal was bowing inwards, then even without waiting, just the Hishtachava alone would be enough to be Mechayiv and Mekorban. V'hachi kamar. And here is the right way, says Rava, version 2 of Rava, to understand our Gemara, our Mishnah. Hishtachava klape pnim. If the Kohen who became Tameh in the Heichal was bowing inwards, O sheshak de Hishtachava, or he waited, or if he waited the amount of time while facing in the other direction, then he would be chayiv. And the Gemara wants to know, it seems to be that some bows get timed and some bows don't get timed. So, and then we're going to see for the rest of the page different types of hishtachavaya that we've already seen in Shas before. Hopefully some of this will jog our memory. What are the types of bowing where we do measure time? And what type of bowing do we not pay attention to the shihiyah, to the amount of time that it takes? Says the Gemara, what do we not count? Zukriya be'almahi. That's kneeling on the ground. However, what about the case to ish bashiyah? When do we time things? So that's with pishut yadayim v'raglayim. That's lying full prostration, flat out on the ground. What we do on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is actually a blend between these two things. We're not flat. There are some people who do that, but we're not. That's not what we typically do. We're usually on our knees with our heads lowered, but it's kind of in like a bowing position, but on our knees. It's not pishut yadayim raglayim, like totally flat body, like face down snowman. That's not what we do, but that's what the Gemara is talking about. The kamashir shihiyah, how much is this amount of time? Meaning, how long do we assume it takes to do this type of ishtachava, pishut yadayim raglayim, subject to a machlokes amoraim. Pligi bar Rav Yitzchak bar Nachmeni v'chad de'imeh. Machlokes is between Rav Yitzchak bar Nachmeni and whoever was with him. Umanu, who was with him? Rav Shimon ben Pazi. The Amrila, some say it was Rav Shimon ben Pazi v'chad de'imeh man Rav Yitzchak bar Nachmeni. We don't know how it was structured. Either person 1 was with person 2 or person 2, the same 2 people. And then the Gemara says, V'amrila Rav Shimon bar Nachmeni, that it was V'amrila Rav Shimon bar Nachmeni, that it was talking about not Rav Shimon ben Pazi, but Rav Shimon bar Nachmeni instead of him. So it would be Rav Yitzchak bar Nachmeni and Rav Shimon bar Nachmeni. Chad Amar Kememre Dehai Psuka. One says the amount of time it takes to read the following pasuk. V'echad amar ki mi v'yichru l'seifa. So let's read the whole pasuk. Again, the first shita holds that the amount of time for hishtachavaya pishu yadayim v'raglayim is the following pasuk. V'chol b'nei Yisrael roem beredes ha'esh v'chvod Hashem al habayis v'yichru alpayim arza al haritzba v'yishtachvu v'hodos Hashem ki tov ki le'olam chas. So let's call it 6 or 7 seconds, however long it took me to read it. However, the second shita starts counting only at v'yichru, which is halfway through the pasuk. I'm approximating on the numbers, but it's either 6 seconds or 3 seconds. However long it takes to do Pishu Yadayim V'Raglayim, I would have thought it depends on the person. If you're a super agile person, you do burpees all the time, no problem. Pishu, that's easy. You can do Pishu Yadayim V'Raglayim without even blinking. You got a bad hip, you got a bad knee, you got a bad shoulder, it's going to take triple the time. The Gemara is not looking at it that way. It's not relative, subjective to the person. It's an objective amount of time based on the analysis of this pasuk. And of course, the content of the pasuk is talking about this, where it says "Vayichru apayim arza al haritzpa," putting yourself flat down on the ground. Tanu Rabbanan, we saw this Gemara multiple times. Kida al apayim. Kida was a very, very, very difficult type of hishtachavaya, where your feet were planted on the ground and you folded over and your face was on the ground. I would need a double hip replacement if I did that. I could never bend myself over that way. There are I always failed that test as a kid. Remember the president's test? You used to do that in the gym at Hill Torah. Failed miserably every year. I'm the least flexible. But that's what the kida was. The kida was mamish, feet on the ground, folding yourself in half with your face on the ground. Very difficult to do. That way I was good. Forward I won every limbo game. I was good at the roller skating limbo, but this I could not. The forward motions are not good. That's what Bathsheba did in the presence of David. Kriya, the language we saw before, is al bir kaim. That's kneeling. I did a circumcision for a family. Goyim sheba goyim sheba goyim. I'm mamish from goyim, and in the bedroom of this family, they had a I think they were Catholic. They had like a kneeling platform for prayer. And it was like this elevated platform about 6 inches. It was padded. You would go down on your knees and you would pray. I've seen it now multiple times since then. What? Oh, I didn't even know that. I didn't know that. I wasn't here at that phase. I never came in the early phase, but this guy had it in his bedroom, like he pushed it, and like the whole Virgin Mary, the whole Gans Mishpacha was up there on the wall with rosemary beads. I didn't know. That's Kriya. That's what?
Yeah,
whatever.
It's not whatever. It's the recorded shiur.
Are they rosary beads? No idea.
Rosary. Your father did not teach you something.
I doubt that. He probably did, and I was a neglectful student.
He said I corrected.
Yeah. By the way, thank you. You did a great job. Rosary beads. Rosary makes more sense anyways. You shouldn't know about the rosary. That should not be unbelievable.
One of the expressions that the Catholics use is they pray the rosary.
Right.
As if it's a prayer rather than a bunch of beads.
Like ring around the rosary.
Your brain is so fascinating. How did that happen? That's amazing. Okay, Kriya is al bir kaim. So that's what we rarely do. I guess I don't know if our hishtachavaya on Rosh Hashanah is probably closer to Kriya. V'chein hu omer, the pasuk says michra al birkav, but we see a link between Kriya and birkav. Hishtachava, when we discuss about hishtachava, is a pishu yadayim raglayim. V'chein omer havo navo ani v'imcha ve'achecha lishtachavos arza, by the story of Yosef and the dreams. Yeah, you would put your thumbs down like this, but it was also a paim arza. That's correct. Did you see that here? You remember from last time? Yeah. Here it says it's in Megillah. What? Someone got injured. Yeah. That word you knew, but progeny you couldn't figure out. Unbelievable. Why isn't that quoted here then?
But you were told you shouldn't do it. It was some
I wonder if the Balei Tosfos bring it here. Kida ala paim. No, Tosfos doesn't bring it. I remember that also. I was just surprised because when I looked at the side here in the Maseches Hashas, it says that it was in Brachos and Megillah. I don't remember the Brachos one, but the Megillah one I remember. Yeah. I remember the injury. I couldn't have told you where it was. All right, 4 tekus in a row. So don't worry, we don't have to learn any halacha right now. It's 4 tekus in a row. Boy Rava. Sarach shehiyah lemalkos. Remember, we were discussing about shehiyah in the Beis Hamikdash for the chiyuv of the korban. That's what we were discussing in our Mishnah. But is it also true for malkos? Because you did a lav. So boy, tzarech shehiyah lemalkos. Oh, ain tzarech shehiyah lemalkos. The korban gemiri shehiyah. Do we only have a tradition that one will have a chiyuv for this case of tumah for waiting for bowing only by as it relates to a korban, or lemalkos lo gemiri shehiyah? O Dilma, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, finally on today's daf. O Dilma, Bifnim, Gemiri Shehiyah, only when it comes to Bifnim is that the case. Lo Shna le Korban, Lo Shna le Malkos. We don't care what punishment, all punishments, Korban, Malkos, meaning, let's just take the question outside. We know that if a person does this type of Shehiyah, they're going to be Chayav a Korban. Would the same halachas apply by Malkos, yes or no? Would we say the rules are broad or are they narrow? Says the Gemara Teku, we don't know the answer to this question, although this is quoted in the Rambam. I didn't look up the Rambam, but it's in the Halachos of Bias Mikdash. I'm curious what he paskins. He puts the little hey here, Tzarech Shehiyah Malkos. Yeah, that you would still get Malkos. Okay. Boy Rava, second one, the second Teku. Tala atzmo be'avir azara mahu. Let's say a person is hovering over the ground in the azara, and he's in a box of some kind, and when he magically becomes tameh in that moment, so if he's in the box and he's hovering and he can't do ishtachavah on the ground, what would be the din? Ki gemiri shehiyah debas ishtachava. Does a shehiyah have to be such a shehiyah where you can actually do ishtachava, and the lav bas ishtachava lo gemiri, and perhaps we wouldn't be chayav a korban in a case where you can't do ishtachava. Odilma bifnim, once you're in this space, shehiyah gemiri loshna debas ishtachava loshna delo bas ishtachava. This would be an applied case where a person literally physically can't do ishtachava. That would be enough kamina. If the person can't bend over, they're quadriplegic, whatever the case may be. If they can't do bowing, and they wait long enough, are they gonna that wouldn't apply to a kohen because you can't be a kohen if you have a moon like that. But whatever the case may be, if you can't do ishtachava, would that count teku? We don't know the answer to that either. 7 lines down. Can't write exactly. That's why my example wasn't a good one. Boy Ravashi, time atzmo b'mezid mahu. Up until now, we've been talking about a person who became tameh b'shogeg. What if a person becomes tameh b'mezid? Be'ones gemiri, we know that if a person became tameh, it wasn't their desire to become tameh, it just happened. So then maybe we would say gemiri shehiyah, then the rules of waiting apply, and therefore you'd be chayav a korban. But b'mezid lo gemiri shehiyah, and therefore even if you sat there all day, you wouldn't be chayav a korban. We know this already from other areas of halacha, where there's a difference between doing an avera b'mezid and doing an avera b'shogeg. Dilma doesn't matter. B'fnim gemir shehiyah loshna ba'onis loshna b'mezid teku. Or no, I don't care how you became tamei, whether or not you became tamei b'mezid or b'shogeg. The halachos of shehiyah apply. If you wait, you're chayav a korban. If you don't, then you're not. Teku. We don't know the answer to that either. And number 4, and that will bring us to the 2 dots. Boy Rav Ashi. Nazir bekever, way out of left field. We've been talking about the Beis Hamikdash until now. If you have a Nazir bekever, do we say that this concept of shehiyah is bifnim gemir shehiyah, but bachus lo gemir shehiyah, that this din of waiting applies even by other forms of tumah outside of the makam hamikdash? A nazir in the Beis HaKvaros, he finds out he becomes tamei, so does he have to peel out right away? Is there shehiyah? Udilma ba'ones gemir shehiyah lo shna bifnim v'lo shna b'chutz. All right, so there too, teku, we don't know the answer to that. So the Mishnah also had taught us that balo be'aruka chayev b'ktsara, chayev kama b'ktsara pater, that once a person becomes tamei, he has to make a beeline for the closest exit. It was interesting, on Shabbos, I daven at Kins in the morning, and Rav Hershel Shechter Shlita got Shlishi. And there's like a funny routing when you come down from the Mizrach of Kins. You come down, and there's 2 ways to go. You can either walk up the aisle on the right side, make a left at the halfway point, and then come back to the bima. Or, and this is what he did, he came down, made an immediate left from the bottom of the stairs, went up the mechitza, and then came around. So here we have a din that you're supposed to do the shortest distance. I presume he made a cheshbon of some kind. It's got to be close in feet. It's very, very close.
To get there.
Shortest distance to get there.
Right.
I'm talking about going to get the aliyah. I didn't know which way was shorter. He walked off the bima to get his aliyah.
Oh, that beam.
He walked off the stage.
Stage, right.
Yeah, correct. Thank you. So when he walked off the stage to get his aliyah, I thought he was making this cheshbon. I don't know. I presume he was. I don't know. But it was interesting because I don't know which one's actually closer. But he that left kind of brings you closer to the bima immediately. That first left is a little closer. It's probably close. It's probably close.
I think the left hand one is probably a little bit short.
Yeah, not by much. Anyways, here too, in a similar way, though we're trying to avoid an isser here, is that if this person becomes tameh, he has to find the exit that's closest to him and go straight there. So the Gemara says if he goes to the exit that's further away, he's chayiv. So if I have an exit from wherever I am in the Azara and I become tameh and I'm a Kohen, one exit is 10 feet away, one exit is 12 feet away. The difference between them is an isser d'oraisa. That's what the Mishnah says. Balo be'aruka chayiv. If the exit that you choose is further away, you're chayiv. Biktsara pater. I'll just throw in the nafkamina. What if the exit that's closer is crowded? You could get out faster from the longer exit, the one that's further. So that would be a nafkamina. Amar Rava, and listen to this din. Ktsara she'amru. The exit that's closer, afilu eke b'tzad godel. Even if you walk the tiniest of steps, Akev, your heel, b'tzad godel, by the thumb, by the toe. So you're taking baby steps. You don't even have a gap in your feet when you're walking. Heel to toe, as we would say in our parlance. So says the Gemara, Rava holds that it's better to go to the shorter one, even if you're taking baby steps. It's okay. You don't have to run. It just has to be to the shorter exit. Ve'afilu kol hayom kulo. You could be taking, as long as there's forward motion. We don't care how long it takes you to get to your literally baby steps. That's fine. No isser d'oraisa. It feels chutzpahdik to walk out slowly, because if you're mamish tameh, you should get out. That's what it feels like to me. Rava's like, you don't know what you're talking about. The baby steps count. So, by Rava asks, and remember, Rava is the one who just said this. Rava is the one who just said this. Then you can walk super slowly. What did Rava say? What did Rava ask? Shehios mausheit starfu. Let's say he pauses twice while he's walking. And each shehiyah, remember we had our timing from before, the whole pasuk, half the pasuk, and whichever shita you hold like, what if you had two partial shehiyos? Are they mitztarev to one shia to be mechayev you as you're walking to that closer exit? So the Gemara wanted to say 2/3 of the way down on Yud Zayin and Aleph. Well, the tifshal leimi didei. Maybe he should look back at his own source and say hasam and say that over there afilu ekev b'tzad godel. Even if you walk super slowly, no problem there. There's no mitzvah. Says the Gemara, that's a terrible comparison. The case of the stopping is not comparable to the case of ekev b'tzad godel because hasam in that first din that Rava taught b'delo shah there was no waiting again. You could walk a millimeter at a time and have zero Isser D'Oraisa. It might take you an hour to get out of that building. No Isser D'Oraisa. But if you left the room in 30 seconds, but you stopped for 6, Isser D'Oraisa. This is what Rabbi, it's a chiddush. It's a huge chiddush in the Isser of Shehiyah. It's not normal. Ba'amine Abaye me Rabba. Abaye then asks a question from Rabba. Take a look at Rashi right here to the right. Ba'amine Abaye me Rabba. Rabba bar Nachmeni shahaya Rabbo. V'chol hecha di'ika ba'amine Rabbahu v'lo Rava. Here he's just pointing out that Rava was his contemporary, 4th century of the Amoraim. Rabba was his Rebbe, 3rd century Amoraim. So that's why we often find in the Gemara, Rabba and Rava are interchangeable. They lived one generation apart. It is the tiniest scribe error to mix this up in the Gemara. And Rashi here knows exactly what's going on. So he clarified. Our Gemara is framed correctly, but that's he's just calling it out. So what is this question that Abaye asked his Rebbe? Balo be'aruka shir ktsara mahu. If I can get to the further exit faster than I can get to the shorter exit, how would that work out? Remember, Rava totally doesn't agree with any of this. This is Abaye asking Rabba. Rava, we know what he would say. I don't care how long it takes you. Get to the closer exit as slowly as you wish. No problem. Don't go to the further exit even faster. Abaye wants to know what his Rebbe felt about that because he's listening to Rava. He's like, that's ridiculous. Why would you do that? If you have a further exit that's a clean path, go, run. Why would you take the longer longer route to the shorter exit, go to the longer exit if it's faster. So Abaye wants to know, is this what his Rabbi holds? So what he clears a chakira. Do we say shiur gmiri, v'chibalo be'aruka shiur ktsara pater? Are we concerned about the time, the shiur, and therefore if I can get to the longer exit in the minimal amount of time of getting to the closer exit, I'd be pater? O dilma dafka gmiri, or no? Are we saying dafka only the closer exit, like Rava is saying, that be'aruka chayv and be'ktsara pater? So Abaye is torn. He listened to Rava talk in the base medrash. He's like, I'm not sure. He calls his Rebbe. He goes to Rabbi. He says, Rebbe, teach me Torah. Is Abaye right that it's dafka, that be'aruka it's chayiv even if it takes you 10 seconds, and biktsara, and biktsara you're pater even if it takes you 10 hours as long as you have forward motion? Says the Gemara, Amar Le, what did Rabba say back to Abaye? Lo nitna aruka lihidachos etzlo. Rashi says, second line before the wide lines, Lo nitna aruka lihidachos etzlo lahatir afilu b'merutza. Rava is right. Be'aruka is going to be chayiv and biktsara is going to be pater. Okay, 5-6 lines from the bottom. Maskef lo Reb Zera. Eladekay malon, we have a din. This din is found in Maseches Sanhedrin. Tameh, if you have a Kohen who was Tameh, Sheshimesh, who did avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. This guy did something very wrong. Doesn't sound very wrong because we're not used to the distinctions of Tuma V'Tara, with the exception of Hilchos Nida. Kimad V'lo, we almost never deal with Tuma V'Tara. So says the Gemara, Tameh Sheshimesh b'misa. He gets his chayv misa. So says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Heichi mishkachaslo. What's the case? If he didn't wait and he made a beeline for the door the second he became tameh while he was doing the avoda, heichi avid avoda. What's the case where this guy did avoda once he became tameh? So he walks in the Beis HaMikdash at 9 a.m. on time for work. He's in the middle of doing his avoda. 9:15, he becomes tameh. And by 9:17, he's out the door because he became tameh. So says the Gemara, if he walked out the door right away, heichi avid avoda. What avoda could he possibly have done that would have been chayv misa? And idashaha, and if he waited too long, he's a bar karesu. So that's worse than misa. So what is this perfect storm where he became tameh sheshimesh is chayv misa? If you want to say that there's a shiur, it's a fixed amount of time, and he did the avoda and left within the time of the shiur, let's say it's the pasuk, 6 seconds, and he does the avoda and leaves, well, mishkachas la da'anis nafshe b'ksar v'avid avoda. In this case, da'anis means he pushed himself, he worked hard to get the avoda done. So, he's walking out, he stops for 2 seconds and does an avoda. Let's say he turns a piece of meat over on the mizbech, and he gets out in 4 seconds. I could understand that case scenario. That's possible. Ella says the Gemara on the top of Yud Zayin Mabez, Eliyamris dafka gmiri. If what you're saying is that it's dafka, then heichi mishkachasla. Then what's the case? What's the case that it's dafka, meaning you can't stop at all? You got to go straight, like Rava said, constant forward motion toward the closest exit. So then heichi mishkachasla. Amar Abaye, my kushya. Mishkachasla kigon shababik tzara. He's on his way out. He doesn't even break his stride. V'hafach betzinura. This guy's multitasking. He's on his way out. He's literally walking. He's like this. He's like, I'm tameh. As he's walking, he takes the fork and he flips over a piece of meat. So then he did nothing wrong with shahiyah, constant forward motion. While he's in forward motion, he turns over the meat on the korban, on the mizbeach. Beautiful. This follows the din of Rav Huna. The Amar Rav Huna, Zar shehafach betzinura chayiv misa. This was the scenario where he wasn't chayiv kares, but he was chayiv misa. It was only smooth operator. He doesn't break his stride. He's like, boys, I'm checking out, but on my way, I'm flipping the korban. And when he did that, he was chayiv misa. So that was the question that was brought prior. of what is this case of Tameh Sheshimesh B'misa. Clever. And now, Gufa, we're on Yud Zayin Amud Beis. We're going to be going until about 8 lines from the bottom of the page. Amar Rav Huna, Zar Shafach B'Tzinor Chayv Misa This Din, Heichidami. Idelo Hafach Lo Me'achle Pshita. If the guy had never turned it over, and because he never would have turned it over, it never would have been consumed, Pshita that he would be chayiv because he did avoda. But, says the Gemara, there's an iteration here where he should not be chayiv even on his way out. Remember our guy, as he's walking, he flips it over. Says the Gemara, if it were to be the case that even had he not flipped it, the fire was hot enough that it would have consumed my kovid, then the fact that he flipped it over was irrelevant. And he should not be chayiv misa, because b'manavshach, whether or not he turned it over, the heat is hot enough, and the mizbeach was plenty hot, there was plenty of wood, it was consuming olos all day long. Remember we spoke about the kitzin on the mizbeach constantly doing stuff. That was very, very hot. So and we're kind of asking a kasha on what we said before. We had just said over the last Gemara that this guy, as the way Stan put it, this smooth operator, this guy becomes tameh. He doesn't even break stride, flips over the korban, and he's chayiv misa. So says the Gemara, would he be chayiv misa if the meat would have been consumed, even if he didn't flip it over? Says the Gemara, lo tzricha, and this is a chiddush. De'ilo hafach behu me'achle betarte shoy. Had this smooth operator not flipped it over, it would have taken longer to burn, 2 hours. The hashta, now that he flipped it over, me'achle bechad shaita, now it's going to burn faster. So Pashat, that's true, because the raw side is facing down now. There the Gemara says, anyone who hastens the process of the avoda, they are chayiv misa. You're right. It would have consumed, it would have burned, but in 2 hours instead of 1. I just made steaks tonight for dinner. They would have cooked if I didn't turn it over. The grill's hot enough.
Don't turn it over. There's people that flip all the time.
Are we talking about the mizbech or are we talking about grilling? Okay. Yeah, same concept, same exact idea. You only do one side?
Flip once, everybody knows the rules.
You gotta flip once.
Yeah, no, you have to flip one.
Oh, yeah.
No, there's flippers where you're flipping all the time.
Oh, no. Or you get a spit. You got to get a spit. Yeah.
Big pig on it?
Pig. I was waiting. That one I knew was coming. That one I anticipated. Yeah, absolutely. The apple's kosher. The apple's kosher.
Questionable, actually.
Yeah.
There's a whole sheet on it.
Really?
I think it's-
Yeah. Okay, says the Gemara, quarter of the way down, Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Amar Rav Oshaya, Ba'ina di'ima milsa. I want to say something, umistafina mechavraya, but I'm a little bit scared about what my friends are going to say. Unbelievable. I love this. Here's what he says. Hanichnas lebeis hamenuga. If a person walks into a house that has a negat saras, the house is a bais hamenuga, but he walks in derech achorav. He walks in backwards, back first. So he goes into the door, but instead of walking in forwards, he walks in backwards. Ve'afilu kulo, even if most of his body comes in, chutz mechotmo, except for his nose, because of course the nose protrudes from the body. When I was in Shalvim, my Rebbe, Rav Yaakovson, he said that when he was in the tanks in the 6-day war, that he used to start the tank with his nose. He had a big nose. He used to say, "Yesh li af maspik gadol, lefachot b'yom kippur ani yachol lasot kacha la'atchil et hatankim." That was how he used to start the tanks, with his nose. So if somebody walks into the Beis Hamenuga backwards, he's backing up, and he stops where all of his body is inside except for his nose, tahor. This is what Rav Oshaya wanted to say. Why did Rav Oshaya say this? Because the pasuk says, "V'haba el abayis," one who goes into the house will be tamei, but only derech bia asra Torah, only a normal way to walk in the house, like a mensch, you walk in forwards. Who walks into homes backwards? That's when you're going to be tamei. But if you walk in backwards, you're not going to be tamei. You'll be tahor, provided that at least one part of your body is out. And why was he afraid to share this with his friends? Umistafina mechavraya, because Here's what he was afraid of. In other words, he didn't know how to answer it. Ihachi, his friends are going to say to him that walking in backwards, only derech bia asra Torah, but you walked in backwards, then kulonami. Even if even your nose was in, maybe if your whole body was in, you should also be tahor. Why? Because you walked in the wrong way. And maybe that's not derech bia asra Torah. So he didn't know how to answer that. He knew the first part of the din, that if you walk in backwards but your nose is still outside the threshold, that you're tahor. But he didn't know how to answer the tzushtel, the next question of, what if you walked in all the way backwards? It's still not derech bia. Still not the normal way to go into a house. So Amar Rava says, don't worry, I got your back. I got it. Kulo, if your whole body is in there, lo garami kelim shebabayis, pashut, that all of the kelim in the house are going to be tameh. And how do we know that? Tichsiv, because the Torah tells us, b'fem maleh, what are you supposed to do? Empty out the house before the kohen gets there. Because once the kohen paskins on the house that it's a beis hamanuga, everything inside is tameh. Why are those things tameh? Because the kulo of that item is inside. You have a kli, the whole thing's inside is tameh. So he says the human body, backwards or forwards, it can't be any different than the kelim that are inside, because the pasuk says v'lo yitma kol asher babayis, that we tell the kohen take everything out so that not everything inside will become tameh. And Tanya Namihachi, we have an idea that supports this, and he says to Rabbi Shai, don't be afraid. Pipe up in the base medrash. You're right. You're 100% right. What was he right about? Let's just say it out clearly. Is that if you do back in, but your nose is out of the room, you're tahor. But if your whole body goes in, you're tameh. No different than the kelim. And Tanya Namihachi, the Brisa says a third of the way down, a little bit more on Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Gagin halalu, the roof that is on top of the azara. If you stand on top of the azara, ein ochlin sham kache kachim. Now, normally you're allowed to eat there underneath, under the roof, but on top of the roof doesn't have the same din of kedusha by the azara. By the way, we have a totally different din by tuma. Tuma is ola ad rakia, but this stops at the ceiling. So the kachim inside the heichal mutter, on top of the heichal aser. So that's what he said. Ein ochlin sham, gagan halalu, ein ochlin sham, kachim kachim. Vein shochlim sham, kachim kalim. You're not allowed to do shchita there. That's not allowed either. The tameh shenichnas derech gagin leheichal, pater. If somebody enters into the heichal by rappelling down from the roof, they're pater. Shene'emar, ve'lemikdash lo savo, derech bia asra Torah. So he was saying to Rav Oshaya, I not only agree with you, I have a brisa for you. Just like in the Beis HaManuga, if you walk in a funny way, you're going to be pater. The same thing is true here. The Gemara does not distinguish if it's the whole body or part of the body, but that's not for now. Next two dots, halfway down. Our Mishnah had said this line, Zohi mitzvah saseh shebemikdash she'en chayavan aleh. This is the mitzvah saseh of the mikdash she'en chayavan aleh, that the Sanhedrin will not be chayav a par helim davar shel tzibur. We know a general din, that if a Sanhedrin gives a psak that Klal Yisrael follows, and it turns out that they were wrong, and Klal Yisrael innocently followed the Sanhedrin, assuming that they were right, which is nearly always the case, but in this case they were wrong. So normally you're chayav a par halam davar shel tzibur, except for a couple of cases, and this is one of them. Zohi, this case, the Tuma Shebemikdash case. So it says Gemara, Heicha kai dekamar zohi. What Mishnah are we coming from? What is our Mishnah continuing from when it says, this is the example? What's the beginning of the conversation? So it says the Gemara Hasam kai. What we're talking about is a Mishnah on Maseches Horios. The Mishnah says, Ein chayavin al aseh ve'al los aseh shebemikdash. That when Sanhedrin makes an error and they're chayav a par helam davar shel tzibur in general, it doesn't apply over here with an aseh or a losa aseh of something that took place in the mikdash. And as well, the ein mivian asham talui al aseh ve'al losa aseh shebemikdash. If Sanhedrin makes an error about something in the mikdash space, there's no korban. Aval, the Mishnah in Horios continues. But in a case like Nida, where Sanhedrin paskins a particular way, and they made an error, so then we do bring a par helam davar shel tzibur, and umevein asham talui ala sei ve'alos hasei shebenida. Now that's the Mishnah in Horios, and obviously there's the exception is mikdash, and nida is a sample of one of everything else where you're going to be chayiv. So it says the Gemara, V'ka'amar, based on this Mishnah, we have our Mishnah. The Mishnah Horios is bridged over here to our Mishnah that we learned earlier of Zohi mitzvah saseh shebamikdash en chayav aleh. All right, says the Gemara, and we'll close with this. Zohi mitzvah aseh shebenida shechayav aleha. What is the case example where there would be a par helam davar shel tzibor? So says the Gemara, hayemeshameshim tahora. If a man was in the middle of intimacy with a tahor woman, the amra, and she declares during tashmish amita, the amra lo nitmesi, and she says, I just was poreses nida, I just became a nida. So the halacha is that he has to wait until aver mace. He has to wait until the aver tashmish no longer has a kishui, no erection anymore. Because if he does the following, opiresh miyad, if he leaves the woman's body at that time, but because there's a kishui, so there's also hana at the exit of the body. That's usher. That's tashmish amita with a nida and chayiv kares. Mipnei sheyitziyaso hana alo kibiyaso. That any movement at that time is going to have hana, and that's not allowed. So this was just a sampling of where if the bezdin told him the wrong din and he violated that din, they'd have to bring a parhalam davar shel tzibur. We'll stop right here at Itmar. Wishing you all beautiful night.